Okay, so these are the uses that organisms have for calcium that we're most used to seeing. This is a single-celled organism, so there's an opening. These would be snail-like. Anything with a shell, including our octopus, whose shell is modified in their head to protect their brain. Anything that has a shell belongs to the phylum Mollusca. These guys are gastropods because they have one shell, and their muscular foot will be like a snail. And then we have these that have two shells. This is a mussel. And these guys belong to bivalva within phylum Mollusca. And they have kind of like a hinged double shell structure with a muscular foot that allows them to open the shell and filter their food through. So these guys will crawl along the bottom and scrape their food off of rocks and off of bottom substrate. These guys will filter their food. They have a little opening, and so when the water passes over, they'll capture the single-celled organisms that are floating in the water column, or decomposing organisms that might be in the water column. Other sources of calcium that we're probably not as used to seeing include shell-like structures that our marine worms produce. So you see these kind of tube-like shells. They've secreted this around their soft bodies, and they live in those little tubes to protect themselves. And the tubes are anchored onto substrate as well, onto rock. Okay, these guys have calcium embedded in their cell walls. They are plant-like. We call them protists because they're not true plants. But you can see what's left of their skeleton. They've been bleached by the sun, so these are no longer living. And you can see the white in their tissues. They were red when they had the photosynthetic tissues, or photosynthetic pigments in their tissues. That allowed them to accomplish photosynthesis. But as they die and as they're bleached by the sun, you can see the calcium that was embedded in them. These are types of a species called corallina. So they're very similar to coral, but they're an algae, like a seaweed. And again, that calcium helps them to protect themselves, to protect their soft tissues, and to anchor and hold on to bottom substrate. We would find these guys in very shallow water. They're very small. And remember, they'll have to be close to the upper layers of the sunlight of the ocean to get sunlight to accomplish photosynthesis. So here are three other types of algae. The ones that we just looked at are types of red algae that have been bleached, and they belong to phylum Rhodophyta. These guys are brown algae, and they are the more common seaweeds that you see on the beach. So this guy you guys have probably all played with on the beach. Most of its blades that would have been attached to the floats have been degraded, right? This was on the beach, so it's no longer anchored to the ocean floor and no longer living. So it's starting to decompose. This is a brown algae, or a member of Theophyceae, and this is called Macrocystis. This is our giant kelp, so this makes up our kelp beds. And these little air pockets help it to float up in the water column. So these guys can be in much deeper levels of water. So they'll have an anchor called a holdfast that holds them onto the bottom, and the little floats will help it float in the water column, and then its blades have photosynthetic pigment to capture sun and accomplish photosynthesis. So these are some of our precursors to our land plants. Now this guy's much smaller, but he has a very similar structure. Here's his holdfast, his anchoring mechanism. He's going to be in shallower waters, right? He doesn't grow quite as tall, but he grows taller than our red algae, and he's got little tiny floats that help him to float in the water column, and little tiny blades to accomplish photosynthesis. This is Microcystis, so Macrocystis, Microcystis, a smaller version, both still brown algae. This guy It's very strange looking. His blades have decomposed. We call this a staghorn algae or seaweed. And this is what I mean by the holdfast, the anchor that holds the seaweeds onto the substrate. So again, this guy will be in a little bit deeper waters than the last few species that we looked at, but shallower than our giant kelp. Again, they'll anchor. They have little blades. This is a much sturdier stipe. This little thing that attaches the blade to the holdfast is called a stipe. And so it just holds them upright in the water column, and his little blades, again, will accomplish photosynthesis there. These are all types of brown algae. The Monterey Formation on our coast is one of the largest sources